Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you were invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. Now, what would happen if you greeted every day of your life as a creative, intentional, and ceremonial adventure? What would it feel like to go to bed every evening knowing that you're doing good work based on your soul's mission? The author we're talking with today offers inspiration, insights, and practices for a creative journey of personal and collective healing through the power of archetypes. Our guest today is Mara Brandscombe, author of the new book, Sage, Huntress, Lover, Queen. Access your power and creativity through sacred female archetypes. Mara is a yoga and meditation teacher, a writer, mother, artist, ceremonialist, and spirit coach who finds great joy in leading others along the path of self-transformation. She's passionate about weaving the art of mindfulness, self-care, mind-body practices, and earth-based rituals into her offerings. Mara is a regular contributor to Spirituality and Health magazine, Gaia, and Wanderlust. The author of Ritual as Remedy, she lives in both Vancouver, Canada, and a cabin in the woods with her husband and two daughters. Hello, Mara, and welcome to the Pathways Show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as you put forth in this incredible book that you say, we are at a time of reclaiming the feminine. We are waking up as a collective, women and men, children and elders. There is a vast movement towards developing the archetypal qualities of the feminine. So can you describe what's going on in those terms?
Yes. Well, I believe we've lived out in a way, we have really lived out the systems of patriarchy, capitalism, quite a strong identification with the masculine. And what I have observed and feel, and also through the pandemic, this return to self, this return to wholeness, this return to our ability to perhaps be our own guide on the path towards joy, towards peace, towards freedom. And to me, that has an internal channel that needs and is essential to be awoken in order to live that out in our daily life. And that, to me, is the return to that feminine energy, which is both soft and strong. It is both light and dark. It is an ability for one to see the whole perspective rather than the end result only.
Right. So it's more holistic. Would you say the feminine perspective is just naturally more holistic?
Yes, and it's dimensional. I mean, dimensional in its holistic energy. So it's, and it's not this or that. And an archetype is not a stereotype. An archetype it's a code, it's a pattern, it's a formula in a way that lives both in our conscious and our unconscious self. And so when we work with the feminine, what my interpretation, my direct experience has been that there's this intuitive intelligence where we draw in and we come to a sense of listening before we then draw out and we express it out into the world. So it's a holistic energy, and yet it has this spiral dimension to it that in a way holds, I believe, the capacity for us to reach to new levels of consciousness within ourselves.
Uh-huh. And why is it coming to the forefront now? Is it because of the bankruptcy of patriarchal ways of doing things, or some desperate straits that we're in now with the environment, Mother Earth, etc.?
Yes, and I believe it's a response to all of those things. And I especially love the response to Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is calling. And, as we know, the planet, much of the planet is, on fire or in a state of imbalance. And that state of imbalance, that we can look at that and we can reflect back and come into a sense of inspirational healing, like if we do our own work and then we all work together to then share that work out into the world, already we're elevating our consciousness to hopefully hold Mother Earth in a way that, you know, in her resilience, in her capacity to heal, in her capacity to rejuvenate, in our capacity to heal from past wounds, trauma, imbalance, so that we can rise and say, let's try this angle out. Let's see what happens when we really take care of ourselves, when we honor the path. And we have all these tools. This is also why I feel it's coming forward now. We have all of these ancient mystical tools, spiritual tools. We have more knowledge than we ever have before. And so how do we then respond internally and keep so steady within? And I believe that comes from honoring the feminine in all of us.
And does that describe your introduction has a phrase, evoking the feminine way, and that's what you're talking about right now. And you mentioned that some of the attributes are inclusiveness, creativity, intelligence, efficiency, sustainable, emotionally attuned. Talk to us about the feminine way, because I think people need to be inspired by that. And it makes me ask the question, is this book just for women? I mean, is there value in this book for men?
Yes, and thank you for asking that. And yes, there is absolutely value for men. And this work is beyond gender in a way. And yes, of course, more women will be, you know, will gravitate towards it based on the feminine archetypes. And yet,
And also based on the fact that women buy 90% of the books for sale these days. Anyway, but
interesting. That's interesting. Yes. And here's the thing that I'm proposing. You know, I was a student of, I have a degree in feminist studies and cultural history. And so, you know, 30 years ago when I did my degree, that's what I was studying. Okay. So I was fascinated by the history that I was told in school was actually not true. It was biased. It was based on, you know, the story of colonialism as opposed to truth. And that coupled with, and then I did my feminist studies, which, you know, I've always considered myself a feminist. And yet what I'm proposing here is a new way. It's not necessarily about feminism, or it's more about the embodiment of being so connected to your own source. And by source, I mean the center of who you are. That means your mind-body connection. That means your intuitive recall, your capacity to hear your intuition when it's actually speaking to you, your capacity to regulate your nervous system so that you're not constantly running out of fight or flight or the hustle culture that has been in the past. So this new feminine way is this, and I feel it, I see it, I'm inspired by it, I strive to it myself, which is to fully and wholly take care of myself so that I can fully and wholly express my passions out into the world without limitations.
Okay. And how is it that limitations have existed? What kind of limitations are you referring to?
Good question. I'm referring to the limitations perhaps that, you know, and my parents, I love them, bless them. They did the best job they could. And I was raised in a very middle class, non-religious family where there was rules to abide by. The rules were, society says that as a young girl, you need to do this and look like this and act like this. And you need to go to college or university to get that degree, even if you're not sure if that's what you want to do in the world. And so all of these, you know, societal constructs of, you know, to be a good girl or to be a good boy or to be the provider or to be so that, and that's why the archetypes coming through become codes. They become support patterns for us, because if I unpack the mother archetype, just as an example, the mother archetype, and this is mothering, not necessarily of children, although it could be, but really mothering of self and mothering of your craft. mothering of your soul passion. If I'm caught up in the mother's shadow, for example, which is being a martyr or a victim of society, for me saying, I'm never this, I'm never that, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm stuck in my shadow. And I'm actually feeding a past paradigm of keeping me small. I'm feeding that rule that I was taught to be a good girl, to be a quiet girl, to be a successful girl, for example, woman. And so what I'm unpacking is this like origin story of like, what are your personal stories about, what you feel you can and cannot do? Why did they exist? Where did they come from? And are they holding you back in life? Those are the questions we ask ourselves. Because often then, if we stay in that model of, fear or not worthy or living this life that's like filled with turmoil and drama, that leads to health problems. That leads to, all sorts of things. So if I'm staying in that story, then I am not living in my full potential. And the new feminine way is about living in our full potential.
Okay. Now in the book, you explicate 7 feminine archetypes of the modern psyche. How did you come up with that? I mean, isn't the universe of archetypes very broad? I mean, how many archetypes are there in existence? I mean, there's more than 7, but these are the 7 that you selected that are feminine. The maiden, mother, sage, huntress, lover, mystic, and queen. And so how do these relate to each other? How did you come up with this set?
Okay, good question. When I was 20 or 19 and in my first year of university, or you call it college in the US, I received a mentor in a women's group circle based on the pagan Celtic wheel of the year, which is my heritage. I'm Scottish, English, and Irish. So I somehow discovered this incredible group of women, elders, who were willing to take on other folks as, they became my mentors. And we worked fully with the moon cycle, the seasonal wheel of the year, and maiden, mother, crone, the Holy Trinity, the Trinity there. So I deeply was inspired by this as quite a rite of passage, me being quite in the maiden archetype at that time of my life. And so I really, that it was always a forever imprint in me. And then as I, continued my studies, and I worked with, I'd say, thousands of women really over the years in supporting them to live their best life, I started to see patterns. I saw the patterns of the archetypes, specifically these 7 archetypes. I just started to record. I discovered them. I unpacked them. I read more about them in other myths and lore and literature of the past. And specifically these 7 archetypes, I feel are connected to the 7 energy centers, or the 7 chakras, or chakras as we call them. So when I was doing this work in preparing to write this, I then fused and merged my knowledge of mind, body, spirit healing and the 7 energy centers with each archetype. So I had a great exploration of the science and the foundational energies of each archetype through that lens.
Okay, so let's just correlate the 7 archetypes that you are writing about in this book with the 7 chakras or energy centers, which I'm very familiar with. We've done a lot of shows on the chakras over the years on Pathways, and so each chakra is associated with an element, air, fire, water, earth, that kind of thing. So which chakra is, okay, let me ask first, you've got maiden, mother, sage, huntress, lover, mystic, and queen. Are these in a chronological order to represent the order that they unfold in a woman's life?
Thank you for asking. And no, they are not. They are how I wrote it, but I would encourage everyone that you are not one or the other. And yet this is valuable information for us to work with at any time of our life. So at 95, for example, and I had a direct experience with this, I had a 95-year-old woman come on my yoga retreat this year. Incredible. She's incredible. And I feel that when she arrived, she was quite in the queen energy. And after the 5 days of the program, she became the maiden, and it blew my mind. She returned to the original essence of being innocent, pure, free, that zhuzh for life that the maiden holds.
Uh-huh.
So that was deeply inspiring for me to see this. So that's the potential that I see in this, that in the maiden actually really works. And so it's not, here's the one thing, that I worked on the maiden with the underworld. So the maiden kind of rides below the root chakra, actually. So the maiden, I wanted to just bring that forward because, also with the energy of Persephone's myth, and, I unpack mythic characters also in each archetype to relate it to a more universal, deeper essence. And Persephone is, the energy who goes down into the underworld. So the maiden kind of works that underworld energy to then rise up. And the mother is the first chakra. Actually, mother is root, mother is earth, mother is Gaia. Sage is second energy center. That's the intuitive one. That's the wise elder that lives inside each one of us. The Huntress is third chakra, divine will, that spark, that element of fire. Then we work into the lover, which is the heart chakra. And then we work into the energy of the mystic, which is around the throat energy center, and the capacity to really listen and kind of hold space for that star wisdom, like a deeper listening of consciousness. And then we work into the energy of the queen, which is again working that power of intuition. So the queen not being a colonial queen, the queen being a sovereign leader, an evolutionary leader. And then at the very end, what I do is I bring in the weaver. The last chapter is dedicated to the weaver. Now, the weaver holds also that capacity to be in crown chakra. So the weaver being universal consciousness, that we are part of this web. And how I describe it is that the weaver lives inside each one of us. So Paul, the weaver lives in you. The weaver lives in me. The weaver lives at the center of the body like a spiral. Inside the spiral lives all the archetypes. So whatever archetype you call forward, so this is really a concept. So if you're working more, like for example, if you're working more with some of your archetypal knowledge and male archetypes, you could even think of it as that it lives right in that all of them live in the center of your body. And at any time you get to access their wisdom, and you get to, have a look at the shadow that comes forward for us to evolve, because shadow is here for us to say, okay, I see you, I hear you, I feel you. And this is medicine for me to then be able to evolve to the next stage of my consciousness, if I am patient enough to listen to what the shadow has to say.
Can you give us an example of the shadow offering information that of value like that? Or any one of all of the archetypes have a shadow side, as you point out in the book, but can you give us an example of how the shadow is a particularly important thing to honor and learn from?
Absolutely. So directly, I think about the sage, and the sage living, in our gut instinct. So the sage is, how we have that gut feeling about something. And if, let's say, I keep ignoring that gut feeling, or that little voice within that says, this is meant for you, this is the time now. If I keep pushing that down and repressing it, then I'm living in a state of shadow. I'm literally then acting out in ways that, and I think we've all had this experience in life where we avoid, the work that needs to be done at the time. So we'll skirt around and we'll make ourselves so busy that we fall into exhaustion. So we actually don't have to look at the hard truth of of what wants to come forward. And that hard truth, for an example, might be, a past trauma that happened when one was a child. And now the work as an adult is to get the therapy, to get the support, to do the work, to do the spirit work one needs in order to free that that story, that trauma that might be living in the body. We all have an experience with that. It could be as simple as, not getting what you needed from your mother as a child, therefore looking and seeking love and never being fulfilled by it your entire life. That's a good example.
Wow. That's related to the sage archetype or the lover archetype?
Well, I just brought forward, pretty much all of them there, but the sage archetype, the shadow, really is not trusting one's gut instincts.
I see. Right.
And not less, pushing it down. And a lot of times it'll be like in addiction, like addicted to food, addicted to, numbing through, drugs and alcohol, or pills, or, we live in a culture where we can, just forget about it by taking another supplement or something else. And so this work is, awareness is the first thing, is really like being so curious, like, that triggers me. That person triggers me, or what they just said triggers me. I wonder why.
Right. Now, your book has definitely got a practical aspect to it, a how-to aspect. I mean, you include step-by-step creative practices, guided visualizations, and rituals and poetry. How would you recommend that somebody read and benefit from this book? Should they start at the beginning and read it all the way through, or what's the best way to use your book as a support?
Well, I would say if you're new to the concept of archetypes, that might be a good way to start, is to start at the beginning and move your way through. And yet, if you have some experience with this, you may look through the table of contents and see the archetypes and read the sections and say, that one really lights me up. I'd like to start with that one. So, let's say someone's, for example, wanting to embrace a little bit more spiritual energy. That would be the mystic, I would say. And so it does not need to go in chronological order at all. But it really does depend on one's personality, because some people really like to start something and then finish it, whereas others can kind of bounce around a little bit. I would also use this potentially almost like an oracle deck, where it could sit, on beside your meditation table with your journal beside it. You could have your meditation, and then you could simply open this up. And what I just opened up now was literally a journal prompt exercise. So from the Maiden, a very simple one. So after a meditation, you could have a look at one of the exercises, for example, and just see what comes forward. It's very curious. And the reason why I wrote the books, it came very strong message. I received guidance, in fact, and it was very powerful. It was like a lightning flash in my body. And the message was, write for the collective. Put the work out for the collective, for collective healing. So therefore, after I wrote the books, I just had to give them away. It's just like, now the work is out. Now the work is there for freely for one to engage with and in, however they resonate with the work.
Wow. There's so much content in this book. It's so beautiful and beautifully written. I was just amazed at the level of detail and depth that you bring to this discussion of the archetypes. I got a lot out of it, and I really want to encourage our listeners to take a look at it. I want to ask you, is it important to stay open to all of the archetypes at once? I mean,
that's a great question. I would say yes. And to tell you the truth, writing this book, I can now say this after I'm out of it, it was a profoundly healing experience for me to enter in to each archetype. I would do about 2 months per chapter. And because I'm a teacher and a guide of, yoga, meditation, breath work, visualization, I would then lead my students through some of these exercises to see how they kind of responded to that, or to see what the inspiration was. So it was a very rich journey, so that we can go through all of the archetypes and again see, I mean, when you sense a trigger with someone, it's interesting because people love to say, oh, I'm that. Oh, I'm the mystic for sure.
Right.
And then what my encouragement is, yeah, because we love to label and identify, and because it kind of feels good to like, oh, I'm this, not that. And then other people be like, I am not the maiden, like the maiden is not me. And so I would, encourage folks to be, well, maybe start with the maiden and see what the resistance to the maiden is. And you are all of them. Yeah, you are all of the archetypes. And I really feel it builds our capacity to have a spiritual journey in the human form, and also to no longer fear expressing what's really lighting you up inside. What's your passion? I feel like the world needs more of that from us.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we're almost out of time here, and I want to give you the opportunity to offer our audience maybe some final words of advice, other than obviously reading your book, which I'm going to recommend that they do. But do you have anything that you want to share in closing about how to embody an archetype, or just in general?
Yes. So I would say and this is just general for, being a human in this wildly complex world,
Right.
is that we must have some sort of meditation or contemplative practice, some sort of mindful practice on a daily basis. Meditating for 5 minutes each morning, start there without your phone, put your phone in the other room, or be in nature, turn your phone off. So you're just fully present. Start practicing being fully present with yourself. And then we can feel more about what is actually going on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mara. There's just so much more that we could explore, but we have run out of time. And I want to make sure to tell our listeners about your website, where they can get more information on your work and on this book. It's www.marabranscombe.com. Mara, M-A-R-A, Branscombe, B-R-A-N-S-C-O-M-B-E, all one word, marabranscombe.com. And for those who may have tuned in late to today's show, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of Intuitive Intelligence, a book that shares the theme of pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. Now, don't worry, you can play or share this interview anytime you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Mara Brandscombe, author of Sage, Huntress, Lover, Queen. Access your power and creativity through sacred female archetypes. Really a wonderful book, very well written, and a lot of fun to read. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to Pathways, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at www.kboo.fm every Sunday morning by myself or one of our associates at 8:30 USA Pacific time. But even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com. That's spelled D-I-V-I nation.com, as well as via iTunes, Paulo's YouTube channel, and other free podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Mara Brandscombe and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.